What is up, my friends, my Canadian cousins, my neighbors to the north? Welcome back. Today is Sunday, November 6th, and that means that Remembrance Day is coming up. And for us, it's Veterans Day, but it's the same day, November 11th, because that is the day that the armistice took place in World War I, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. And for a while now, I've been meaning to get to doing a reaction to Vimy Ridge. I do understand from doing this channel how significant an event Vimy Ridge was in Canadian history, and from what I have learned, it really is one of those seminal events, I guess, along with the Confederation, that Canadians look back as to being part of what makes Canada Canada, part of the national identity of being more than a part of the dominion of the British Empire. I'd be lying if I, did a reaction on Vimy Ridge and pretended like I don't know anything about it and be completely surprised. I'm a history buff, and World War I has been something that I have been fascinated by for many, many years. I've read many books, I've seen many documentaries, so I do have a fair amount of knowledge about what Vimy Ridge was and why it was important to the war. So I thought, what could I do that is going to be a genuine reaction where I'm going to learn more than just battlefield tactics and why what the Canadians did at Vimy Ridge was so interesting and so important. I thought, instead, let me try to find something, if I can, that lets me know why the battle is so important to your history and to your national identity, and how Canadians feel about it. So I did find something which I'm going to be reacting to. I really, really hope, guys, that it's good. When you do a blind reaction, you can't pre-screen the videos, because if you do, your reaction won't be genuine. And I know this subject is an important one, and I want to do it tastefully, respectfully, and right. So I hope that the approach I'm taking and that the video I'm about to watch is going to achieve those goals. If not, and it doesn't turn out right, I either won't post it or I'll be open to suggestions on something different to do, because I would revisit this topic in a heartbeat in order to get it right if I don't this time around. So let's hope that I do, and let's get to the video. So this video is Why the Battle of Vimy Ridge Matters by CBC News The National. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell if you are so inclined. See you on the flip side.
The story of Vimy Ridge confronts Canadians once again. This time in a signal year, 100 years after the battle, 150 years since Confederation. Vimy's cries of triumph and more.
So if this was 100 years after the battle, this would have been in 2017.
Have echoed through the decades.
I'm going to back up a second. Didn't want to interrupt.
Vimy's cries of triumph and mourning have echoed through the decades. Loudly at times, at others in whispers. Did it create a nation or expose its deep divisions?
Forgive the hat hair.
Battlefield victory or cautionary call for peace? Memory and meaning have shifted through time. So what should we make of it now? Because Vimy demands, always has, that we choose. Starting, as ever, with the battle itself, what it was and what it was not. It began early in the morning, April 9th, 1917, a cold Easter Monday. Canada's 4 divisions, 100,000 strong, and fighting as one for the first time, were grouped in order down the line. 15,000 infantrymen waiting for the attack to begin.
It was utterly dark still.
but before it began, there was a lot of preparation that went into this, which made Canada unique in the way it dealt with this battle. A lot of innovation using machine guns as sort of artillery in what would, I forget the terminology for it. There was also a method developed to identify through listening and visually where the enemy's artillery battery would be to take them out before the battle started. I mean, just a lot went into the preparation for this before the actual day of the battle.
You could hear this
indirect fire is what I was thinking of.
Overhead, and then just a continuous crash along the line. I felt that if I had put my finger up, I should have touched a ceiling of sound.
Then they moved over the top, from the heavy muck of their trenches and tunnels.
Or if you weren't frightened, you were a fool. A man that said he wasn't is either a fool or a liar. Just as simple as that. We're just hoping that we could make it, that's all.
Making it was far from assured.
It was no foregone.
Is that a Newfoundland accent?
The Germans had spent 2.5 years fortifying the ridge. It was a very powerful position.
In fact, more than 100,000 French soldiers had already died or been wounded trying to take it.
His Royal Highness,
Correct.
Prince of Wales, then attached to the Canadian Corps, he was accompanied by Generals Currie, Morrison, and Watson.
Britain, Sir Julian Byng commanded the force, though Canadian Arthur Currie led one division.
Currie.
They had about 3 months to prepare for this battle. They integrated new infantry tactics, new artillery tactics.
Currie had been sent by Byng to learn those tactics from the French.
Currie is the man pushing this in the Canadian Corps, and Byng agrees. And these improvements begin to be implemented in time for Vimy.
The assault used the so-called Vimy glide, or creeping barrage. Large guns gave cover just ahead as soldiers ran forward with precise timing, 100 yards every 3 minutes.
Soldiers know where they're to go. They look at the air photos, they look at the maps, they have a better sense of what they're to do.
And it all worked, though nothing could prevent the battlefield horrors of the Great War. After 2 days, they captured most of the ridge, with support from artillery units. War still fought with horses. On the 4th day, the highest point, the so-called Pimple, fell. The battle was won, but at such a cost.
It was soil and mud and sweat and blood. It was where they achieved a great victory, but also where they lost thousands of their friends.
Yeah, just taking a moment to pause for that. It was also just this sort of poetic way to say that. I'm not sure she meant it, but soil and mud and sweat and blood.
3,600 Canadian dead, 7,000 wounded.
Men fight really for their comrades more than anything else, side by side, and brought out great acts of heroism and great acts of self-sacrifice for others.
Still, after 2 years of losses, the Allies had needed a victory. The Canadians had delivered, and Arthur Currie soon took full command of Canada's troops. The battle...
And especially if you put it into context that it wasn't that long before, towards the end of 1916, where the British had fought the Battle of the Somme, which was accomplished very little, and there were grievous losses, which was sort of piggybacked on Verdun, where the French were, trying to repel the Germans' push towards making progress in the war there, and also suffered grievous losses.
Vimy Ridge was
so
over.
this victory
The
was
debate over its meaning was just beginning.
important for more than just tactical reasons.
The victory had a huge impact on the soldiers and on the home front.
What it did do was make the Canadians think that they were special. And they were. They were very, very good soldiers, and that mattered to Canada, to the Canadian Corps, to the soldiers?
It was all over European newspapers. It came to in Canadian newspapers, so Canadians were very proud. The Allies were very happy.
They brought Canada out of the First World War thinking, yes, I think we can be a country among nations and we have something really to contribute here.
Sort of just the independent respect as Canada not just being part of the British Army. And yes, I know I'll probably get in the comments that there were Canadians fought at the Somme, and I think that their performance there was very good too, and suffered losses, which is, if I'm not mistaken, one of the reasons they were chosen to lead this offensive at Vimy.
But for all that, the battle itself was of tactical importance only. It was later Canadian victories which actually helped end the war.
The victories of the August, September, October, November 1918 tended to be forgotten.
The last 100 days.
War.
Yeah. No, really.
Those 100 days battles were championed by Arthur Currie himself.
He thought other victories were more important. I think he was right.
Yet it was Vimy that took hold in the Canadian imagination. Brigadier General A.E. Ross recalled its first moments. In those few minutes, he said, I witnessed the birth of a nation. A powerful image for a country still a decade away from full autonomy. Powerful, but not entirely accurate. Because Vimy helped convince Prime Minister Robert Borden that Canada needed more troops from across the country, leading directly to conscription.
Conscription became a hugely divisive issue between French and Canadians. It really split the country. So it's tough for anyone to argue that the Canadian nation was born at Vimy Ridge.
But it was a tenacious idea, and decades later it would make a strong comeback. Before it did, though, there rose up a new monumental...
But sometimes you need the perspective of time in order to, especially with historical events, we don't always know the full impact of events while they're happening, or even years or decades later until the lasting impact can be studied and recognized.
For Canadians to contemplate.
The Vimy Monument is arguably the single greatest monument to the First World War anywhere.
And that monument leaps like no other monument I know for its lost sons who'll never ever come home.
When you walk that, there's still thousands and thousands of Canadians buried under that soil.
The Canadian National Vimy Memorial sits on land donated by a grateful France.
It's not until the building of the monument there in 1936, its unveiling, King Edward VIII unveiling it, 6,000 pilgrims crossing the Atlantic, that really gives birth to the idea of Vimy.
Wow.
This glorious monument, crowning the hill of Vimy, is now and for all time a part of Canada.
Yet what Canada's king unveiled spoke not just of valor, sacrifice, or victory, but of loss and mourning.
It's beautiful.
She is called Canada Bereft. Architect Walter Allward's central figure of his Monuments 20. Here was Vimy tapping a different national emotion.
I think the thing that really comes across to me more than anything else is the grief. The sorrow is expressed in the figures perhaps more poignantly than I've ever seen it anywhere else.
It must be really powerful to be there in person. I regret that when I was in France 10 years ago now, I didn't go and see it. There are World War I monuments all over France. It is striking. And I just happened upon many of them almost by accident. That was a lost opportunity. Maybe
no
next
soldiers,
time.
no rifles, no helmets. Instead, a sword being broken. A fallen figure handing a torch to a comrade behind. Shades of Canada's most famous First World War poem.
In Flanders Field.
And the two soaring figures atop, justice and peace. Then there are these inscriptions.
It became the gravestone for over 11,000 soldiers who died in France and who had no known graves.
The Vimy Memorial reached beyond its namesake battle, giving a resting place for fallen Canadians from every battlefield, and a focal point for a country to remember an entire war.
Around us here today there is peace and the rebuilding of hope.
But then just three...
The irony is that it wouldn't be too many more years before World War II started after this, which is very sad, of course. Yeah, those monuments, I mean, monuments like that can be very powerful once you see and touch the names of the people who are inscribed on there. The 9/11 Memorial in New York City is like that. The Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. is like that. I imagine. I can only imagine what it's like to be here, touching those names.
And Vimy receded from view.
The astonishing thing about Vimy is it's always been there waiting. When people decide they're going to go back and look seriously at the First World War again and see how it affected this country.
Sure enough, 2 decades after the Second World War ended, Vimy re-emerged, coinciding with an important Canadian anniversary.
There were a lot of discussion about identity in the 60s because we were near the centenary of Canada at the time, and Vimy was one of the was part of this discussion about identity and what makes us Canadian.
From Lester Pearson to Stephen Harper, Canadian leaders began referencing Vimy.
That day in 1970 April, it was enough to have the Maple Leaf badge and be working and fighting together.
Every nation has a creation story to tell. The First World War and the Battle of Vimy Ridge are central to the story of our country.
Pearson emphasized peacekeeping, Harper, Afghanistan. But each put Vimy in service.
Look at the pockmarks that still scar the landscape from
to an idea of
100 plus years ago.
Harper, Afghanistan.
Well, just let me back that up a second.
But each put Vimy in service to an idea of national unity.
It's incredible.
Even if that was at odds with what Canadians in 1917 thought of Vimy.
It was divisive. It pitted French against English, labor against capital, farms against the cities. But that's forgotten now. Now it's a marker of nationhood, certainly in English Canada.
But contrast the glowing idea of Vimy with the shabby condition of its monument by century's end, crumbling from decades of neglect.
It amazed me that Canadian governments would have allowed the monument to fall into disrepair.
Prime Ministers Chrétien, Martin, and Harper changed that, pumping in millions, rescuing the names.
Thank God.
After 3 years of meticulous work, it was ready.
Once you see it, you just never forget it. It's a mesmerizing spectacle rising above.
And as her uncle had done some 70 years before, Canada's sovereign was on hand to dedicate it.
To Canada and to all who would serve the cause of freedom, I rededicate this magnificently restored memorial.
I love the fact that we have to keep going back and asking ourselves questions about what these monuments mean to us, struggling to understand it. puts us on a road where we really begin to understand our country better and better each time.
We choose what we say about our past. We select events that are important and have meaning for us, but it's also a reconstruction.
Human nature. Mm-hmm.
And though the soldiers of Vimy are all gone now, their voices help us do that.
We do regard Vimy as where Canada as a nation really started. When you've seen a man take a whiz-bang in the stomach, you lost a lot of patriotism.
Two distinct memories of Vimy, both rooted in history. The Vimy Memorial is pristine again, ready to teach us that history, if we would learn it. A battle that lasted less than a week, whose meaning we've interpreted for a century. However you choose to see it, the idea of Vimy Ridge will continue to rise up.
Oh, soldiers never die, they simply fade away.
Asking us not to forget.
Yeah, that was really interesting. I definitely learned a lot more about how Canadians feel about Vimy Ridge and what they think of it. It is interesting to know, and I wonder if you all know the somewhat divisiveness that was the result of conscription, where, you know, how Canada performed at Vimy Ridge resulted in those believing that Canada should increase its participation in the war and its soldiery in the war, and so conscription seemed the necessary means by which the country got more soldiers over to the European theater, and that was controversial. Now that's been forgotten, it seems. I guess, you know, other than people who do deep historical dives into this, but it seems like it's been forgotten in the Canadian psyche about what Vimy Ridge means to you all and how important it is. And so is this something that, you know, people who are of specific generations, you learn about this in school as being one of the seminal events that made Canada a nation? And how do you feel about it? You know, I think just knowing a lot of details about Canada's performance and participation in the First World War, I have the utmost respect, and you can't view Canada as anything other than a nation of individuals at that point, even if that wasn't a complete reality yet in 1914 to 18. But, you know, I had done a reaction to a video about how Canadians change when they hear the word war, and it focused mostly on World War II, but it did go into some of the history of Canadian soldiers in World War I being very professional. The sort of bent of that video was that they were maybe somewhat ruthless, and I think I honestly got a little annoyed about that, and I do know that they were very tough soldiers, and there were instances where there was no prisoners taken and all that, but because I thought that it lost the importance of Canada's contribution to the war and was almost portraying them like barbarians, and that somehow the soldiers were formed by the time of World War II into a more professional soldier, you know, professional way of conducting themselves in war. So I'm glad to be visiting World War I in general. And I am digressing a little bit off topic, but I think it is important because it seems that Vimy was maybe the seminal event in a war that was a seminal event in Canada's moving forward in its history towards being internationally recognized as something more than just part of the British Empire, something very much its own very capable nation. So anyway, that's my perspective on it, and I'm just some New Yorker. So I would really, really love to hear your perspectives about this and start a conversation, because after all, that's why I'm doing this. I hope this was good and respectful. If you think you would like me to look at something else concerning Vimy Ridge or World War I in general, by all means, let me know. And I would love to do that. I know some people have commented already that I should take a deeper look at General Curry, and maybe I'll do that at some point, but I'm open to other suggestions as well. Okay, more to come this week, this Remembrance Day week, and let's, pray for our fallen heroes throughout history and our current heroes serving in the military in our two nations right now. I will see you soon. Thank you very much.